So today I want to go over a Druid landslide build for Season 1 of Diablo 4. And this is seeming to be one of the strongest Druid builds for Season 1, and I think there's three really big upsides to this build. First off being, you don't need to use any unique items for this version of the build. I'm currently using no unique items. The build's still ridiculously strong. Number two is it's using the new Druid legendary aspect, which causes our Poison Creeper to also spawn waves of landslides. And three, this build doesn't use Grizzly Rage, and I know 90% of the Druid builds in the game use Grizzly Rage because of the massive amounts of critical strike damage stacking it has, but this build doesn't use it, so it's going to be a pretty big change up if you've only been using builds that integrate Grizzly Rage. And next up we have our skill tree starting with Storm Strike, and we don't actually use this to generate any spirit. This is primarily used to utilize our main proc for this build. This also does give a 15% damage reduction every time you use it, and you will be using this quite a lot. Upgrade 1 has a chance to immobilize, upgrade 2 has a chance to make enemies vulnerable, and since we are actually using this, having a chance to become vulnerable is nice, but this is primarily used to keep vulnerable on bosses, and it may even be worth to take this point out and put it somewhere else. Then we're going down, putting 5 points into Landslide. This is our primary damage dealer, and even though we have this ability on our bar, you don't really ever cast this. We're primarily putting points in this to scale it for our other abilities that spawn landslides. And upgrade 1, after your landslides damages an enemy 4 times, the next one will immobilize. Upgrade 2, which is the primary reason we have this on our bar, is when you immobilize or stun an enemy with anything, you gain a terror mode. Each enemy hit by a landslide consumes a terror mode, causing a guaranteed crit with 40% multiplicative critical strike damage. Bosses always have up to a 10% chance to grant a terror mode when hit. And for the upgrades for landslide to actually work, it has to be on your bar. And we primarily want to be generating these terror modes, so we keep this on our bar, but you don't really ever use it. Then we're going down, taking 1 into Earthen Bulwark, which is just a big barrier. Upgrade 1 causes you to become unstoppable. Upgrade 2 causes the barrier to explode after it's destroyed or expires, dealing a decent bit of damage, but it still might be better to take this upgrade point out and put it into other passive effects. Then we're going into Poison Creeper. It's just a big AoE poison that roots everything, puts poison on them all. This is also going to be one of our biggest damage dealers because with one of our legendary aspects, it also spawns landslides. Upgrade 1 increases the immobilized duration. Upgrade 2 increases our critical strike chance by 20% against enemies that are immobilized by Poison Creeper. So we're going to have massive amounts of critical strike chance after using Poison Creeper, and it's going to do ridiculous amounts of damage. Then we're putting 1 into Trample. This is primarily because Trample is going to be spawning us a ton of landslides. Also makes you unstoppable, so that's going to be really good if you get CC'd. Then I put a point into Upgrade 1, so Trample now deals more damage the less enemies it hits. This can actually deal some decent damage, but it may actually be worth to take this point out of the upgrade and put it into a different passive. Then we're going down, taking Petrify. This basically stuns all enemies in an area, increases your critical strike damage, multiplicative scaling, which is going to be another massive increase to our critical strike damage. And then against bosses, it obviously can't stun them, but it increases the critical strike damage to 50% multiplicative, and its duration is increased to 7 seconds. So this not only CCs all enemies in an area, but it also makes killing bosses much easier. Then our capstone is Nature's Fury. Casting an Earth skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill, and casting a Storm skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Earth skill. And this is going to be one of the most important parts of the build, mixed in with one of our legendary aspects. And then for our passives, we have 1 point in the Heart of the Wild. To get 3 points in a Wild Impulse, your core skills cost more, but deal increased damage. And this is incredibly good for this build because we're not actually using Landslide. It's being procced from other skills, so this is just increased damage without the downside. And it also may be worth to get more points into this from your necklace, because that would just be a massive increase to damage without an increase to spirit, since we're not actually using it that way. Then 3 into Predatory Instinct, increase critical strike chance to close enemies. Then 3 into Iron Fur, you have damage reduction while in Werebear or 3 seconds after. Now the 3 seconds after is is important because the only way we get in Werebear is through trample, but since we reset our cooldown so much, we'll be able to trample quite a lot, so we'll have this damage reduction up quite a lot. Then 1 into Ancestral Fortitude to get 3 into Vigilance. After you use a defensive skill, you get a 50% damage reduction, and we'll be resetting Earthen Bulwark a lot, so we'll get a lot of this damage reduction. Then we're going down 3 into Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal more damage to CC'd enemies. Enemies are going to be CC'd a lot, so this is a big damage increase. 1 into Safeguard. Crits with Earth skills fortify you for 2% of your base life. This is the primary way we fortify, and this is basically all you need. We crit so much, and our primary attacks are Earth skills, so we're going to be getting a lot of Fortify through this, basically Fortified 100% of the time. Then Stone Guard. While you have Fortify for over 50% of your life, your Earth skills deal massively increased damage, which is going to be basically all the time. Then 1 into Neurotoxin, so poison enemies are slowed, and 3 into Envenom. You and your companions deal increased critical strike damage against poison enemies, and since Poison Creeper is going to be resetting all the time, a lot of enemies are going to be poisoned. Then we're going down 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal more damage to elites. 3 into Natural Disaster. Your Earth skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and your Storm skills deal increased damage to enemies that are CC'd. Then 3 into Resonance. Nature skills deal increased damage. This effect is tripled if an Earth skill is the next cast after a Storm skill, or if a Storm skill is the next after an Earth skill. So this basically wants you to alternate between Storm skills and Earth skills, which this build also does. Then we're going down, putting 3 points into Quick Shift. When a shapeshifting skill transforms you into a different form, it deals 15% increased damage. Now this is primarily going to be done by trampling and then using our other abilities that takes us out of Werebear. And with us constantly resetting cooldowns, we'll be trampling a lot. Now you can also take points out of this and put points into Heightened Senses, which when shapeshifting into Werebear, which is done through trample, you gain damage reduction against specifically elites for 5 seconds, which are the primary things that are going to kill you. But until you get to level 100 and want to do much harder content, this really isn't needed, because when you're farming gear and experience, you're primarily going to want to be facing enemies your same level. Then next up we have our Spirit Boons. 1 into Wariness for reduced damage from elites, 1 into Sight Talons for increased critical strike chance. Then we're also taking Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. We're taking 1 into Pack Leader, which is one of the most important parts of the build. It's a lucky hit. Critical strikes have up to a 20% chance to reset the cooldown of your companion skills, and since our Poison Creeper is also spawning landslides, this is one of our main damaging abilities that can just get reset constantly. Then our last point is Calm Before the Storm, a lucky hit. Nature skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds. This is for Petrify, and right now with my stats, Petrify is a 35-second cooldown, so we'll be able to have it up quite a lot of the time. And then next up we have our Paragon Boards, and I'm currently at level 82 with 2 zones of renown completed, so that's 8 additional Paragon points. So keep that in mind when you're comparing your board to this one. Now one of the most important parts is taking the exploit glyph on the starter board, because in the starter board there's enough dexterity within range of a level 1 exploit glyph to get the secondary effect, which is when you damage an enemy, they're vulnerable for 3 seconds, has a 20-second cooldown per enemy, so everything you hit is instantly vulnerable. This is the most important thing for starting out in Paragon Boards. Then we're going up. The first board we're taking is Earthborn Devastation. Your Earth skills deal increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and then the glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, which gives a bonus to magic nodes within range. So on this board, we'll get increased critical strike damage with Earth skills and some increase to resistances, but one of the main reasons you take glyphs like this is so you can put points into the stat increases like Dexterity and Intelligence, so you can get a massive amount of these stats from singular points, which will allow you to get the secondary effect of rare nodes throughout the board. And you're also going to want to be taking a lot of the really good rare and magic nodes on this board and on other boards. Earth skill damage increases critical strike damage to crowd controlled, damage to crowd controlled, and more critical strike damage to crowd controlled. A lot of really good rare and magic nodes. And then we're going to the right of this, we're taking the Heightened Malice board, which is when there are 3 or more poison enemies, you deal 45% increase of multiplicative damage. This is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the strongest damage increases of any legendary node in the game. And that's basically all you're going to be taking on this board. You want to get Heightened Malice with the least amount of points you possibly can. Then we're going up and taking the Ancestral Guidance node, but we're not taking Ancestral Guidance. We're primarily doing this for the glyph, and I'm using the Undaunted glyph. Mine is maxed out. This is probably one of the first glyphs you want to max out. Just massive damage increase while fortified and damage reduction while fortified, and we're fortified basically 100% of our life all of the time. And then on this Paragon board, you also have multiple rare and magic nodes that give you an increase to your core skill damage. So within the range of the glyph, we're getting increased core damage, and then just using a few more points to go get this section up here, you have a lot of increased core damage as well. Pretty massive increases from these two rare and magic sections. And then next up we have our uniques and legendary aspects, and like I mentioned, we're currently not using any uniques in this build. I'll probably do more versions of this build that throw in some uniques that may make the build stronger, but currently using none in this build is still pretty ridiculous. Now the main legendary aspect that makes this build work is when you trigger the Nature's Fury key passive, which is our capstone, your non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type are reduced by up to 8 seconds. Now as we went over, this capstone is when we use a storm skill, it has a chance to cast a free earth skill, and when we use an earth skill, it has a chance to spawn a free storm skill. So how this works is we're primarily using Storm Strike to reset our trample and our earthen bulwark. Our poison creeper is reset from our spirit boon that we went over, but since this is such a high chance, using Storm Strike only a couple times will usually reset both of these abilities, and our trample always spawns waves of landslides, which is one of our main ways of dealing damage. And on top of that, any landslides that deal damage, either being spawned from poison creeper or trample, can also randomly proc storm skills from the core skill category, so any of our landslides can also spawn in lightning storms and tornadoes that actually deal some decent damage. So you'll see random lightning effects going off as well. And one thing to note with this legendary aspect is it seems to be somewhat broken when putting it on a necklace. So putting legendary aspects on a necklace make them stronger. And this rule says it could go up to 8 seconds on the cooldown reduction. So it's better when you put on a necklace, but this was actually a best rolled legendary aspect. So normally this legendary aspect's best roll when not on a necklace is up to 5 seconds. The roll I put on this was 5 seconds, so it's a best roll, but I only gave it a 7 instead of an 8. I'm not sure if this is just a bug or if there's some type of internal scaling that determined it to not be a max roll on a necklace, but just keep that in mind when putting this on your necklace. And since we are using a one-handed and an offhand, all of our other offensive aspects can either go on our rings, our main hand or offhand, or on our gloves. But next up, we have Trample now summons 6 landslide pillars, each dealing 80% normal damage, and Trample is now a nature magic and earth skill, another one of the most important parts of this build. Landslide is going to be one of our most important abilities for dealing damage. It'll spawn a massive wave of landslides. Then we have Poison Creeper also casts landslides in a circle around you, and your earth skills deal increased damage to poison enemies. This is going to be the other way we spawn landslides, and this is actually really cool. Once you cast a Poison Creeper, it just does a big circle of landslides around you, so you are going to want to position yourself a little bit away from enemies. And then we have Landslide's Earth Pillars, each strike a second time and deal an additional 12% bonus damage per hit. This is another one of the most important parts of the build. So now when we Poison Creeper or Trample, instead of it just spawning the one wave of landslides, it spawns a second wave that all deal more damage. This basically over doubles the amount of damage you can deal. And then we have casting a Storm skill, grants your Earth skills 45% multiplicative increased critical strike damage. This will be up basically 100% of the time because we're using Storm Strike so much. And then when using an Earth skill, you increase the critical strike chance of your Storm skills. Now you may think the second part is kind of useless just because it's Storm Strike, it's not dealing much damage, but any of our landslides can spawn in those lightning storms or tornadoes, and those are actually dealing some pretty big damage, so increased critical strike chance with those is going to be pretty good as well. Then our last offensive aspect is your core skills deal up to 40% increased damage based on your fortify. This is going to be 100% proc to 100% of the time, and this is just another massive multiplicative damage increase. Then on our boots, we have when you have fortify, your earth skills gain +2 ranks. So basically all of our most important skills are going to have +2 ranks, primarily our landslide, and we're always going to have fortified, so this is always going to be procced. Then for our defensives, we have the duration of Earthen Bulwark is increased by 6 seconds, and when killing enemies, it refreshes a certain amount of its barrier. And like I mentioned, we reset Earthen Bulwark a ton, so you'll be able to continuously have Earthen Bulwark on you to massively increase your defensives. On our chest piece, we have your basic skills grant you 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. This is going to be procced 100% of the time because we use Storm Strike so much. Then on our legs, Disobedience. It's just percentage armor stacking, still probably the strongest defensive aspect in the entirety of the game. And next up, we have our gems, our stats, and our hearts. On our weapons, you want critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies. On our gear, we want damage reduction while fortified. And then for our hearts, I'm currently using the heart that increases your critical strike damage but reduces non-critical strikes. And this is just going to be a massive damage increase because we have so much critical strike with all the different critical strike increasing effects, but one of our other hearts basically guarantees crits as well. Then we're using the heart that suppresses a certain amount of damage, up to 20% of the damage you take. Then when you use a defensive skill, it blows up all of that suppressed damage in a big explosion. Now the explosion damage seems to be broken. It seems to not be calculating correctly, but this is still basically a 20% damage reduction. Now the main heart we're using is the Barber. And what this does is anytime you critically strike an enemy, it will then start to build up all additional damage you deal to that enemy. Then after a certain amount of time, mine would be 2 seconds, it then blows up all that built up damage in an AoE, but also that damage that was being stored on the target is multiplied by 14% per second. So mine would be 28% increased multiplicative damage scaling when this effect is procced. Now this is ridiculously massive because you're basically turning all of your single target damage on one enemy into AoE damage, because all of that built up damage you dealt to a target is going to blow up in an AoE, and when this effect actually blows up and deals the damage, it's a guaranteed crit. So this is why you'll just see entire screens of enemies just instantly blow up. It's because of this effect, and this buildup of damage does prematurely blow up if that enemy dies or if the damage built up on them would kill them. So say that first initial crit you deal to a target would kill it, it just instantly blows up. So this Barber heart is ridiculously strong. Also with this build, you can usually one-shot most bosses you're going to be facing in Nightmare Dungeons. So it's incredibly strong and it works very well with this build. Now there is another heart that will be very good later on, and that is a Druid specific heart that when your ultimate is active, it constantly pulls in enemies to you. Now this is going to be really good with Petrify because we petrify all enemies. It's going to stun them all, make us do a lot more crit damage to them. But then if you're using the pooling heart, it's going to pull everything together, and then all the Barbers are going to explode, just insta-killing everything, because the Barber radius is kind of medium size. So if you can pull everything together, it's guaranteed that the Barber is going to blow up and hit absolutely everything. And if you're doing harder content and you want that pull heart, it's probably going to be better to remove this heart right here that increases your critical strike damage and get that pull heart. You'll be able to pull everything together and basically instantly kill full groups of enemies anytime you use your ultimate. So that is a very good alternate to the hearts we're using. And then we have our stats. And one of the main stats you want anywhere you can get is cooldown reduction. So on your helmet, cooldown reduction, max life is good. Basic skill attack is going to be pretty good just so we can storm strike more and do it more quickly to get our resets. Then I have all stats on this, but something like total armor could also be good. Any other defensive stats going to be all right. On your chest piece, you want all defensive stats. Total armor, damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from close. Some stuff that would be better is damage reduction while fortified, and even damage reduction from poison enemies could also be good. On our gloves, I have a lucky hit, critical strike chance, and ranks to landslide. I also have critical strike damage with earth skills. Attack speed could also be a decent roll instead of the crit damage with earth skills just to storm strike more, but I think the critical strike damage with earth skills is actually going to be better. Then on your legs, you want all damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from fortified, damage reduction from close, and I think the best roll is damage reduction while injured, because this is the damage reduction that was not nerfed. So as you can see here, I have 42% damage reduction while injured. So once you get to 35% or below health, a massive damage reduction kicks in that could easily save you. And this is probably best in slot rolled legs. These are pretty ridiculous. Then on your boots, you're going to want dodge chance either against distant or just dodge chance, movement speed, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction while injured. And then I also have spirit cost reduction on this. Not really useful for this build that much, but you can also get a willpower roll or all stats or any other damage reduction roll. On our weapon, I have vulnerable damage, damage to slowed, willpower, core skill damage. I would want to change it damage to slowed to probably critical strike damage or critical strike damage with earth skills. Then on our offhand, you want lucky hit, critical strike chance, and cooldown reduction. I would want to change the all stats to a damage reduction while fortified. On our necklace, you want cooldown, damage reduction from close, movement speed, and for this build, I would want to change the spear cost reduction to either ranks to envenom or ranks to wild impulses. Then on your rings, I think it's still probably going to be best to be lucky at chance, critical strike chance, vulnerable damage, and maximum life. Maybe the vulnerable damage would be better to change to critical strike damage or critical strike damage with earth skills, but you're primarily going to want that lucky hit and critical strike chance. And that's the entirety of this build. I've really been enjoying this build. It definitely plays quite a bit differently than majority of the Druid builds currently in the game because most Druid builds use Grizzly Rage, use all the Grizzly Rage aspects to massively scale your damage, and all those builds have a similar playstyle, but this one's completely different. Doesn't have Grizzly Rage, and it's fully built around resetting your cooldowns, constantly spamming out your abilities, constantly spamming these massive waves of landslide. Very satisfying build, and if you're looking for something different, this is going to be what you want to use. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.